Welcome to Canada's podcast. Hi everyone, I'm Phil Bliss, founder and CEO of Canada's podcast, coming to you today from Toronto. Matt Panousis is the co-founder and COO at MARZ, which actually stands for Monsters, Aliens, Robots and Zombies. MARZ is an AI-enabled VFX company on a mission to help Hollywood studios push the boundaries, quality and volume of TV, and has developed an AI platform called lipdub.ai. Matt is a lawyer by training and an entrepreneur with a demonstrated history of success, co-founding and scaling B2B technology startups, including ACTO, which was a venture backed by Salesforce Ventures, Resolve Growth Partners, and Panache Ventures, and currently MARZ, which is also ventured backed by Round13 Capital, Rhino Ventures, Harlo Equity Partners, and John Cassaday, with a focus on company strategy, product, operations, and growth. His specialties include general management strategy, operations, product management, go-to-market, business and financial analysis, obviously venture fundraising, business models, product marketing, demand gen, sales revenue operations, recruitment and organization. Pretty much a well-rounded operational CEO. So Matt, welcome to Canada's podcast. Nice to meet you. And, so that people know a bit about you, before we get going, tell us a little bit about who Matt Panousis is, what you do, and how you got here, if you like.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. In terms of kind of where I come from, I actually started as a lawyer by training, never actually practiced. Did my first startup out of law school, a Toronto-based SaaS company called ACTO, and which was a training platform for the life sciences space, and worked on that business for the better part of 5 years and got out of it, and then transitioned into starting a business called Monsters, Aliens, Robots, Zombies, which started as a visual effects company and transitioned into an AI for VFX company where we're building software. We're building software to make VFX fast and easy for the first time. And so the first product we built was a product called Vanity, which was a digital makeup product. And the second product we're focused on right now is a product called lipdub.ai, which makes dubbed content look real for the first time by perfectly syncing the lips to any new audio file. So that's what I'm working on now.
I'm interested, so after all that schooling, degree, second degree, what the heck made you not become a lawyer? I mean, is it the entrepreneur? I mean, lots of lawyers are entrepreneurs, but I mean, you didn't follow that 6 to 8 years of training. Why? I'm just curious. I mean, I have a sort of suspicion entrepreneurs are wired differently, and it might be to do with that kind of thing. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think I knew candidly pretty quickly into law school that it wasn't something I was ever going to be passionate about. I mean, there was kids in my class that loved it, right? Like loved reading case studies, and I just had a sense that it wasn't something that was ever going to make me happy as a profession, and I probably wouldn't have been very good relative to my peers who actually loved what they were doing. I knew they worked harder than me. And so it struck me pretty early on in the experience. Candidly, I also had a philosophy undergrad. So I don't know if you're aware, but there's not a ton of philosophy shops hiring in the city.
No.
It was also candidly somewhat of a hedge for me. But yeah, pretty early on, I knew that it wasn't the path for me. But I met my co-founder in law school, and so it's like everything happens for a reason, right?
That's right. Interesting. So, I mean, so you moved to entrepreneurship. You worked in tech, you did fairly well. You've started this business. Why tech? Why not something else? I mean, you know, is it a passion? Is it, why tech?
I think I just love I love working on the cutting edge. I just inherently find that interesting. Trying to push the boundaries and create new technology that enables, old problems to get solved in new ways. So
Mm,
generally just interested in tech. And I also think tech is unique in the sense that there are very few business models where you can impact um, anywhere near the number of users as you can
mhm.
in that business. And so if you're focused on solving a big problem, like for us right now, we really feel like the localization of media could be much, much better done. And because it's a tech product, right, we have the ability to scale this offering across the globe. Unlike, a services business, let's say, where there's all sorts of constraints to scale. Not to suggest that scaling a tech company doesn't come with its own challenges, but I think for me again, it's the fact that I just find technology itself to be really inherently interesting, and I love the fact that you can solve big problems on a big scale, and you can make a meaningful impact on the global scale if you do it right.
Stay ahead of the game with our expert tips and strategies that will help your business thrive in a digital era. CanadasPodcast.com. Subscribe now.
I mean, you've been pretty successful in, over the last decade or so. What would you say are the top two or three reasons, why you've been successful?
Well, I don't know if I've been successful. I've been working hard. Um, I think the things that went well at my previous business and are going well now is um, being pretty, and some of this will come off as cliches, right? But really being truly dialed into the end user. So, kind of in contrast to what I said a second ago, it's like, yes, the tech is great and you can be inherently interested in the tech, but I mean, you really do have to start with what is the problem I'm solving,
Hmm.
or who, and you should be backing into what tech makes sense relative to that problem, as opposed to starting with a piece of technology that you're really interested in building some solution and then trying to find users for it. So I think in both of
Hmm.
our businesses, we started with a problem set. In ACTO, the problem set was it must be really hard for salespeople who sell. In our case, it was pharmaceutical products or medical device products. These sales
Hmm.
reps are out there, and sometimes they're selling hundreds of products, and yet they only have 2 weeks of time when they're hired to train on everything, which isn't enough time. And so
Hmm.
that was the problem we were solving at ACTO. Was we felt that sales reps that are in the field selling a lot of complex products need a really strong mobile training platform, not only that can train them initially, but also gives them very fast access for information in order to like recall things prior to meetings, what have you. And then all the tech decisions we made were relative to that. So I think, and now with MARZ, I mean, our whole endeavor into AI, again, it started under, of course, AI was cool, but keep in mind when we started working on it, it was 2019. Generative AI hadn't really become what it is today. The tech at the time was only really good at like image synthesis, but we just were speaking to the market, which in our case was Hollywood because we came from visual effects, and just continually saw this pain point of directors and showrunners wanting to create more VFX and just always feeling budgetarily constrained with
Hmm.
time. So we said, it would be amazing if we could, build solutions that allow VFX to be done in a fraction of the time and at a fraction of the cost. And so it was through that we just started that program. And then So I think it's just been a focus on, the end user and what they're really after, where they're being overserved, underserved. And I think the other thing that I've managed to do pretty well is like building great teams to solve these problems. I think so much of success or failure will come down to the team, because the reality is, your initial thesis on a market or a problem, there may be parts of it that are correct, and there will certainly be parts of it that are incorrect. And I think smart teams, what makes smart teams so integral, especially to early stage tech businesses, is smart teams are going to understand very quickly which assumptions were incorrect that you made, and are going to figure out how do we pivot according to the learnings that we're having. Whereas I think less than ideal teams don't go through those learning loops as quickly. And I just, from what I've seen, just going through learning loops as quickly as possible is one of the most important metrics for the success of a tech company. Like I spoke about ACTO a second ago, we got to that problem, but originally, it was actually focused on HR. And and then we would sell it to HR. We'd try is the better word, to sell it to HR, and realize that HR departments generally don't care about mobile training solutions. I know it's funny talking about mobile training solutions like it's crazy now, but keep in mind, this was back in 2013. We were the first native training app on the market. But it was through that learning that HR doesn't really care about this. They're primarily concerned with just doing onboarding and getting teams or getting the new onboards into their respective functional areas to be trained up. It was really through that process of not being able to sell to HR where we really had to look at what we had built and said, okay, who would care about a mobile app? It's like, maybe it would be folks that are focused on, or rather, maybe it would be folks who aren't at headquarters and need not only strong remote training, but also fast access to information. And we literally just listed out all the different industries that have field sales forces that are selling complex products. And then it was through like the testing of messaging with all those different markets that we arrived at pharmaceutical and medical device being or showing a lot of interest. So like that's one example of maybe more of a go-to market learning loop that we had to go through that ultimately informed the way that product was built out. But I think that's what smart teams afford you is going through those motions as quickly as possible.
So what do you like best about being an entrepreneur versus an employee? Not that there's anything wrong. Not that there's anything wrong with being an employee. I'm just concerned about the entrepreneur side.
Yeah, I think I've always had a problem with authority. I don't think I would make a good employee. I know I would make a good employee. I also just generally, my general feeling has always been if I'm going to work as hard as I know I'm going to work, I'd like to do it for myself. So I like the autonomy. I like that the success or failure of what I'm doing is predicated on myself, and not the decisions of someone else in an organization. And I want to have that impact. And it's hard to get anywhere near that level of impact working for others. So yeah, bad with authority. I like autonomy. Want to do things for myself. All these reasons, I think, and again, just like the general love and interest in the tech space. That's just driven.
So, moving on to sort of different perspective, what's the greatest challenge you've faced in your business today that you've been able to to get through, basically.
At MARZ?
Yeah.
Biggest challenge that we faced to date? Ooh, a bunch. So let me think for a second. I mean, there's been so many, right? So that's why it's hard for me to but I can give you a few of the more.
Well, let's look at it a different way. When you're faced with challenges, how do you typically handle them?
Well, I think it's somewhat difficult to answer that question, like the abstract. Easier for me to maybe hone in on specific examples. So, I mean, there's been a few very hard things. I think the transition from a services business to a software business was incredibly challenging, and many told us along the way that it was that many had tried and failed at making this transition. But I try not to be too dogmatic or to listen to universal statements like it can or cannot be done. I feel like the devil is in the details. I think what made our transition work was that we did it in a staggered manner. So, step one was building a great research and engineering team. Initially, we offered our products as services because there were more cost synergies and just general organization synergies with our existing services business. So, keeping the team small initially, starting by selling the products as services, and then slowly transitioning towards software offerings. And then also keeping the two businesses totally separate and distinct. So that was, I summarized it quickly there. That was from 2019 to today. So that's the 5 years that we've been on to make that transition. So that was
funny how 5 years is such a creature. 4 to 5 years is sort of the sort of solution point for so many business startups, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough road, and like within that, there was a myriad of different challenges. Obviously, I'd say standing up an amazing, like especially in the space that we're working in, which is AI for Hollywood. The products are incredibly difficult to build. We're building products that are supposed to be outputting at Hollywood grade quality, so consistently. So as an example for lipdub, the product that I mentioned earlier, you can imagine it's an incredibly hard product to build, right? You have, you're reconstructing performances, and it has to be driven entirely by audio. It has to be fully automated. It has to handle all of the edge cases that you see in complex content. And so like in my first year of us starting to toy with AI, one challenge was we had a team of researchers that were doing okay. It was my first time doing anything in the AI space. So I guess I was naive in thinking that like all researchers are created equal, and it's couldn't be further from the truth. You can have 50 researchers on your team, and if they're average, you'll simply get 50 reasons back why something won't work. Whereas one incredibly talented researcher will give you the answer as to how to make something work. And so I learned pretty quickly that it's just not a game of quantity, it's a game of quality. And so kind of had to scrap the first iteration. I spent almost a year hiring our chief scientist, Daniel Cohen. That was incredibly challenging, but I knew we needed somebody that was world-class to lead a world-class product team. So, within the journey, there's tons of challenges. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, that's good. It's good. I think the kind of scenarios you threw up are good. You know, it's sort of moving on from that to kind of mentorship. Okay, how important that has that been to you, and what's the best piece of advice that you've received?
I think mentors have been so helpful over the years. Not that I have, candidly, it's not like I have a dedicated mentor. I think rather I've gotten the chance to work with some really great entrepreneurs over the years that are ahead of me. And that I still call on from time to time when faced with strategic decisions where I need that sounding board.
Mm-hmm.
The best advice I've received is pretty consistent with, the YC advice. And all that's out there, but it really does all come, it so much comes back to build something people want, talk to your customers. That's
great advice. That's great advice. Never goes wrong.
Sometimes I feel like these things are such like platitudes at this point, but they're correct.
They're not platitudes because you've seen organizations where they haven't done that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, it's true. Many don't. I'd also say that I've been such an avid reader, especially coming from law, and having a sense of how tech work, but really like so much of the learning, it came from people, but from the experience, but it was really just through like an absolute ton of reading, both from like technical skills.
So what book are you what are you currently reading?
I'm currently reading the book that I'm propping this computer up on to make the raw level. Ironically, it's called Fall in Love with the Problem, Not the Solution by Yuri Levine, who was the co-founder of Waze.
Okay.
And other companies. Really well written. Highly recommend. Not finished it yet, but very good.
Canada's podcast is your gateway to success in the world of entrepreneurship. Start listening today. CanadasPodcast.com. Subscribe now.
Well, and what would you? That one recommends. Is there any other books that sort of was a a star, if you like, in your library?
Crossing the Chasm. Mm-hmm. I honestly feel I probably employ Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore and that framework more than most frameworks. It really helps you. Many times when you're building these tech products, the reality is, especially if there are large addressable markets for those products, it can be very difficult to understand how you get from like point A, where you're nobody cares about you, nobody knows you, to, I've penetrated, these major markets. Like that path, he just makes it so clear how to get from point A to point B by finding your beachhead, right? Your beachhead should be predicated on a number of pretty logical criteria, like where is the most compelling reason to buy? Does the person you're selling to have the money to buy your solution? Ideally, there's no competition. And you need a product that fully supports that value proposition. And so it's like, what I love about that book is it just makes it so clear that, yes, you may have many industries, many functional areas that you want to target, and it may feel logical for you to want to do it all at once, but that is in fact not what you should be doing. What you should be doing is looking for actually quite a small market where you feel there's an incredibly compelling reason to buy what you're offering, where you actually have the product that fully satiates that value proposition, and where you can quickly penetrate the market. And that becomes a foundation on which you can build kind of in concentric circles around. And he uses like the bowling pin analogy. So like that first market is your first bowling pin. From there, you different industries, you can go into different functional areas within your existing clients. That one always sticks out. Strategically, I didn't want to read both volumes of Porter, since it's like many hundreds of pages between the two books. I think it's like 1,000 pages between the two books. I read a summary of that book called Understanding Michael Porter by a big consultant. Forget the name, but the book is called Understanding Michael Porter. That one is, I start many strategy books and then end up putting them down because I feel like they are ultimately primarily regurgitations or
yes, absolutely. I know what you're saying. Strategy is strategy. So
yeah.
Bit of fun. Are you a morning or a night person?
Probably more of a morning person. Yeah, probably more of a morning person.
Really early or?
No, not like crazy early, but like I like to get started or a little early in the day. I'm probably up at like, I don't know, 7.
Yeah.
Try and get started by 8 or something like that. But I'm not the kind of guy that can work all hours into the night. Also, probably the reason why law wouldn't have been good for me.
If you had to pick one word to describe who you are, what would it be, and why would you choose it?
One word to describe what I am?
Yeah.
That's tough. Persistent.
That's a pretty.
I'm not quick to give up on things.
Okay. What's keeping you up at night
these days?
Apart from a new child.
I was going to say, you're literally the newborn. No, I think, I'm, 99% of me right now, my attention is just going into lipdub and launching and all the both like exciting opportunities but challenges that go with the launch of a new product. Fortunately, we're launching lipdub off of at least an established brand at this point, being 6 years in, but of course it comes with all the normal challenges. And we're one of the things that keeps me up at night primarily is there are many markets that are showing interest right now outside of Hollywood, and advertisers are showing a lot of interest and are signing up. A lot of online educators, a lot of influencers are signing up, all under the guise of localizing. And then you also have folks that are using our APIs for non-localization use cases. So we have one API partner that's doing basically like UGC, the user-generated content on demand for brands. So a brand types a script and they get a video back immediately of an influencer. Use it, and they're leveraging our lip sync tech. And so what keeps me up is just, who do we start with and why? Because going back to what I just said about chasm crossing, it's okay that we're a little all over the place right now. But sooner or later, right, we should really be honing in on a particular customer type, a particular use case, and it shouldn't be a big market. And so trying to just look at the data.
You really did read that book in detail.
Read that book like 20 times. Not that sometimes the academia, you got to read it all with a grain of salt. It's got to ultimately, there's no framework that'll just slot perfectly onto your business. You still have to use logic and figure out how does the framework truly apply to what I'm doing. But what keeps me up at night is just, what's the right sequencing? What's the right sequencing of go-to market, and how does that inform the product decisions that we're making? Because you can imagine it's a lot easier to build a product when you know exactly who you're building it for.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. So, final question. what advice would you give an entrepreneur, that's sort of starting out, about to start a business or wants to start a business?
I'd say probably like, I know the logic many times is, you have to jump off the cliff right away and start and leave your job and do whatever. I'd honestly say that if you feel like you have a problem that's worth solving, I don't see anything wrong with hedging and spending some of those early cycles really talking to customers and figuring out if that problem is indeed a painful problem. Is that a frequent problem? How big is this market? How many users are there? Because I think the hardest thing you can do as an entrepreneur is start something. Well, if you're starting a business where you're solving a problem that really isn't a huge problem, it's not going to be fun. It's not going to be fun. Selling's going to be very, very challenging. And so like step one is you should be solving a problem that is real. Users find it painful. They deal with it frequently. And ideally, there's a lot of users. That second one is also equally as important. Well, no, I'd say problem is the most important, but being total addressable market constrained also stinks. It's tough. You can do everything right, but at the end of the day, there's a ceiling now to how big you can grow. And so, my advice would be to, really make sure that you're solving a painful problem. And there's so much that you can vet without building anything. I think that's one of the things that that's really been ingrained in me over the years, from like where I started to now, where, you don't have to worry about automation. You don't even have to worry about building a product. If you think you're solving a problem, put a design of a theoretical solution in front of those users, see what they say to it, right? Like there's so much that you can do with little to no resources to validate that the problem exists, that it's painful, that there's a lot of users, that the theoretical solution you're wanting to build, users are telling you that would be helpful. Like there's so much de-risking you can do before leaving your job and what have you. As opposed to, I'd say like the inverse of that would be leave your job right away, do very little market research, build some big fancy thing, and then start testing the market. I think that's just, unnecessary risk.
Okay. Some good stuff there. But we're at the end of our time here, Matt. How can people get a hold of you online if they listen to this and want to ask a couple of questions?
Yeah, I'm pretty good with LinkedIn. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. If you're interested in if there's a product need, www.lipdub.ai. That's the website. And yeah, I'm pretty responsive on LinkedIn.
Okay. Thanks very much for coming on Canada's podcast. It's been really nice meeting you.
Thank you, Phil.